Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about practices. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, have you ever seen a best practice or a practice that is generally followed in one company and then frowned upon in another? Yes, many times, I would say. Uh, there's always room for interpretation for what we call a best practice or a practice that you follow and so forth. And it can actually differ. This is actually one of the biggest areas of friction and adjustment. It's probably I don't think I go too far when I say that it's probably the thing that causes software developers to clash with each other the most in code reviews or in values or all this sort of stuff, because fundamentally there are different perspectives to writing software, and there's fundamentally better ways and worse ways, but then you have these in between things where you have different practices that you believe in. Almost in a sense, it's you can think about it as martial arts. So in martial arts, there are different fighting styles or different styles of martial arts, and the reality is that if you start asking about which one is the superior one or so forth and so forth, very quickly you will get into this discussion where everybody is just like programming languages in essence, which one is the best. Well, it depends, and everybody has their own opinion about it, and that of course extends also to best practices. And so I've been in many companies where they have various ways. It depends on, it can vary from what tools they use, what types of testing strategy that they apply, what type of code style they apply. Like things like, do we use a standard one is very simple. Is it better to make your own implementation of something or use a third-party library? That differs basically every time I go from company to company and from person to person, because the way off is always difficult. Should you use a off-the-shelf solution, or should you re-implement it yourself? And that argument, it doesn't matter who you talk to. Usually they will say one of two things, depending on which side of the spectrum they are. Either they will say, the ones who wants to use an off-the-shelf solution, we should not reinvent the wheel. That's the number one classic, this is what they all say, basically. And then the other one is that we should keep our dependencies low. That's why you should implement it yourself. You may even have heard me talk about this because I have an opinion on that as well. And that's something that you're going to have to sort of face within every company. A good story for you is actually something that's happening fairly pretty much right now. So I'll give you an example of this. So I was the other day, I have these sessions with the software developers within my organization, with the area of my company, and I have a little bit of a architect, let's call it something like that. That's the official term is like staff engineer or principal engineer or something like that. And the basic idea is that we have these open discussions about different practices, because one of my responsibilities is to try to get in this case these are front-end developers, but I have other back-end developers and stuff like that, because I work full stack. Anywho, and so one of the developers starts telling me about the practices they use within their React application related to testing. And so one of the core principles that everybody will tell you about testing, which is practically all like the mainstream literature will tell you about things like the testing pyramid, and the basic idea is that you have unit testing at the bottom, you have integration tests, and then you have end-to-end tests. You go up the pyramid, so to speak. These are like the doctrines of the average company, the average philosophy at the very least. And so he tells me that they in their specific team do not do that, because he has gotten literature from his tech lead, one of the guys who work with me, claiming that in front end, for example, integration tests are better and more useful to write than unit tests. And now discuss, guys. Is that true? Yes or no? Because I have my opinion, and I believe in my opinion, which is that I basically told them immediately that I think I can pretty safely say that that's not really true. And here's why, and then I give you the arguments and so forth and so forth. And then we have this fairly long, I mean, people started sort of like at one point, like people just stopped leaving because we were getting into it. And I tried to show him the sort of the ways that I, for example, do testing within a React application. And I tried to sort of showcase that the higher up you go a testing pyramid, the more difficult it becomes for you to actually find all the paths through the code. I think I even throw out like arguments like, if you only do integration tests, like an example would be, how would you test that the entire system is working if the only test you're running is from an external interaction from this perspective of a user? By that logic, testing something very complicated like an entire system would basically mean that you have one big gigantic super file that manually goes and like clicks on things and tries to figure out, did that thing actually do the thing that you were supposed to do? And the philosophies on this topic can vary a lot. It's the same thing with snapshot testing. Is that good or bad? I have my opinion, and the next person has their opinion, and the discussions just continue. Like, it's the same thing. Like, I have people in my own team that has an issue with this, where this is also, in this case, it's React specific again. Like, how do you use a custom hook correctly? This person basically uses hooks for absolutely everything. Like, it doesn't actually use components all that much. Doesn't actually create, like my style is to use containers and view components, like visual components and container components that hold business logic and so forth, because that's optimizing for testability and things like that and so forth and a few other factors. The other person has a really hard time with that because his entire style is based on just basically creating custom hooks for absolutely everything and never making that separation. And so these differences, guys, they are going to be absolutely it's going to be in every company, and it's going to be in every single like stack, text, like choice of tooling, etc. And so you shouldn't be surprised if this happens. The thing I can tell you though, which is the key, and this is touching a little bit on those other videos I've made, guys, about emotionally distancing yourself. Because if you get too strongly opinionated about certain practices and so forth, if it becomes an emotional thing for you, it's going to be a tough time for you to deal with those situations that occur when you basically have to comply with what somebody else is telling you to do, because you can't always get what you want. So it's really great if you can understand that, if you can be big enough of a professional to say, all right, this approach will work. It's not my favorite approach to do this thing, but it will work. Yours truly, for example, I worked in a company that used Scala, and I'm not a big fan of Scala. I think I've started out being very curious about the language, but I don't really like it. I really dislike it actually as a programming language. But that didn't stop me from trying to get good at it, because it was my tool at my job, and so I really tried to get in with it and like get really good at it. That's, I think, a healthier mindset for you to have. So what I want you to take away from this is that you will definitely see practices that differ, and opinions about different, like how should you write code, how should you write tests, how should you do this or that and so forth. And it's really subjective, guys. It's very, very difficult to find something that everybody always agrees on. Some things are, universally the same, but you should always understand that it's a little bit, you can think about it a little bit as like, breaking up with your spouse or something like that, and then remarrying or meeting somebody new. It's a new person. You can't apply the same sort of, like, it's not, you can't use the same, you can't treat them the same way per se as the person that you were with before. It's a completely, like, some things will of course be the same, but a lot of stuff will also be different. And it's the same thing when you go into a workplace and start working with different tools and so forth. And this is what I try to preach. This is the only thing I try to preach usually, I hope. That is that when you start in a new place of work, your first priority should be to understand the environment that you are in. That's number one. even like when I do, even when I am the boss, or like when they put me in charge of a team or something like that, I'd never like just go in and start changing stuff or like tell people what to do and so forth. My first priority is to do, as I've said in other videos, the inventory. Try to understand how things are working so that you can make an informed decision on when to say this is probably something that is very bad, we should fix it, because not everything is thought through. You shouldn't be afraid to say what you want and stand up for your opinions about practices and stuff like that. But there's a fine line between, forcing people to do what you want because you just want it, and making an informed suggestion that actually is for the benefit of everybody. Have a great day.